Welcome, everybody. Really glad to see you here today. It's going to be a fantastic program hearing from Elissa Auther at the Museum of Art and Design. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Martha Seelman. I'm the Executive Director of Studio Art Quilt Associates, or SAQA, and we are one of the 4 organizations, along with the Surface Design Association, the Quilt Alliance, and the International Quilt Museum, who organize these textile talks for you every week. SAQA is a membership organization. We have more than 4,000 members in countries around the world. And we produce a conference. We produce a quarterly journal full of information about art quilts. And we put on a lot of different exhibitions. Recently, we opened 3 big exhibitions. One called Fur, Fangs, Feathers, and Fins is at the Detroit Zoo for several months. Fierce Planets, all about our universe, is at the Louisiana State University Museum. And Stitch Punk is at the New England Quilt Museum. And if you join, and we are offering you $20 off right now, your art too can be part of our wonderful exhibitions program, and you can be part of our amazing network of people who are just as passionate about art quilts as you are. So please join us today, SAQA.com/join, and use the code TALKS, TALKS, for $20 off membership. We'd love to have you. So today's presentation is Elissa Auther. Elissa is the Deputy Director of Curatorial Affairs and the William and Mildred Lasdon Chief Curator at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York City. And it's one of my absolute favorite museums. Before we started, Elissa and I were chatting a little bit about an exhibition that they put on years ago called Radical Lace, making lace out of the most amazing things, from a rusty shovel to other kinds of things that were done on all different scales. It really is an incredible museum. If you are in New York, it's a must-see event. So Elissa provides the strategic direction and creative oversight for exhibitions, public relations, and exhibition-related public programming. She has published widely on the history of modernism and its relationship to craft and the decorative material culture of the American counterculture and feminist art. Her book, String, Felt, Thread: The Hierarchy of Art and Craft in American Art, focuses on the broad utilization of fiber in art of the 60s and 70s and the changing hierarchical relationship between art and craft of this period. If you're at all interested in the history of fiber art, String, Felt, Thread is a must-have for your library. Recent exhibitions include West of Center, Art in the Countercultural Experiment in America from 1965 to 1977, Pretty Dirty, Marilyn Minter, Senga Nengudi, Improvisational Gestures, and Surface Depth, the decorative after Miriam Shapiro. And then finally, one that we had on Textile Talks, Queer Maximalism with Machine Dazzle. So Elissa is going to talk to us about the collection at the Museum of Art and Design and show us some of the pieces in their collection, as well as some looks at various exhibitions, and talk about their importance in the history of fiber art. So Elissa, welcome. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you. And I'm happy to be back. It was just a couple of weeks ago. I think I was online with the group with Michael Sylvan Robinson,
Yes.
talking about a piece that he is exhibiting in our new atrium gallery. I'm going to begin with a few slides that I used as an introduction for that talk too. So hopefully that won't bore anybody, but it does create some common ground about the institution that I'm presently working at in New York City and its history. As Martha mentioned, I'm going to talk about MAD's collection, fiber collection, as it relates to its exhibition history. I found that that's a good way to organize what we have in the collection, which is very diverse. It is a little less than 1,000 objects, specifically for fiber, and it cuts across many, many different categories. There are woven works, there are commercially printed works, there are non-woven works, large-scale sculpture, there's lace, there's embroidery, there's macrame. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And as I was putting this together, of course, I got only so far and was like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to cover everything here. So it ended up falling very nicely into categories that kind of work chronologically related to the museum's exhibition history. Now, one thing I should say at the outset is that MAD, until very recently, did not have a formal acquisition strategy. So what came into the collection was can appear rather randomly, and it's often just connected to the fact that an artist exhibited and then gifted work to the museum. So that's really where how the collection was built until I would say the late 80s and 90s, when you begin having a little bit more attention paid to well, there's a collections committee that is developed as part of the board of trustees. They have interest. There's curatorial interests in terms of building certain areas, etc. And that changes over time. And nowadays, we update our collections acquisition strategy every 5 years. So we're at the 3rd year of a 5-year cycle with particular focus, which I'm happy to talk about later if that's of any interest to people. But in the meantime, let me share the screen. Okay, this one here. All right, I think everyone can see that. And I'm just going to go forward. So this is the slides that I mentioned that I used as an introduction when I was on the line or on part of Textile Talks with Michael Sylvan Robinson. And I use it to introduce our founder, Aileen Osborne Webb, on the left there. She established the Museum of Arts and Design, which at the time was called the Museum of Contemporary Crafts, in 1956. She was a philanthropist, but also an amateur potter. You see her there working. And then on the right, just one of what became 3 sites that the museum, where the museum existed on 53rd Street, which is where the same block as MoMA. So that's just one of those sites. From the earliest days, the museum focused or included artists working in fiber. And it was a wide range of types of materials, as you'll see. I'm just showing you 2 images here from historic exhibitions. On your left-hand side, Sculpture and Fiber from 1972, really fascinating exhibition I'll get to in a second. And then on the right, the exhibition that Martha mentioned, Radical Lace and Subversive Knitting from 2007. You can probably tell that these are 2 different physical sites because the museum had moved by the time Radical Lace opened in 2007 across the street to a bigger space. And then eventually in 2008, shortly after that, the museum moved to Columbus Circle. Its name had been changed by then to the Museum of Arts and Design. And you see on the left, the historic building there in Columbus Circle. And then on the right, it's sort of refabrication and the opening up of that that concrete brutalist surface to add light into the galleries. And even Columbus Circle looks better now. It was once a not so shining place in New York City. It had kind of gone into decline and then began to pick back up again as MAD opened. So let's go forward to the very first exhibition I'd like to talk about. This is the first one for the museum, Craftsmanship in a Changing World. It opened in '56, the same year the museum was established. It has an introductory essay by Aileen Osborne Webb that talks about the position of the person working in traditional craft media within a rapidly changing world that's being transformed by technology and the sort of development, the expansion of corporate, the corporate world in the US, and the pressure that puts on people, not just artists, but she's speaking specifically here about people working in fiber, glass, ceramics, wood, etc. Like, what's going to happen to those handmade objects in a world where everything has kind of been industrialized? And so it's a lot about that. It's about championing artists working in these mediums and what they can provide that the machine cannot. So this is just the interior of the exhibition catalog, but it's very revealing. You see the types of objects that were being exhibited, ceramics, and you have an example of metal work here. And then there's one rug by an artist named Miriam Leaf, who was working in Sausalito, California. But on the right-hand side, there's something very interesting. This is the last page of the catalog, and it lists all the objects that were made for the offices of the museum. So this was in keeping with the philosophy of the institution. So there was a reception desk that was handmade. There were library door handles. There were bookcases. There were draperies. There were lamps. There were rugs, chairs, all the accessories for the kitchen, the planters even for the plants, which I find so fascinating. This is a work by Lenore Tawney. It's just another page of the catalog. I'm going to show it to you in color here on the left-hand side. That was included in the show, as well as the work on the right, also by Lenore Tawney, and it's called Bound Man. That was the very first fiber object to come into the collection. In fact, it's the second object to have been acquired by the museum in 1957. So right after this exhibition, and it was something, again, that would have been gifted by the artist. At this point, Lenore Tawney she's established herself as a weaver, but she's moving in a very radical direction here, beginning to rethink how to work with what she invented, an open reed, so that you have these spaces where she can create shapes, etc. And we'll get to another exhibition where she moves further, still working on the loom, but creates even more radical sculptural shapes with her weaving. So that is a big, this is something I just discovered. I did not realize it was this piece that came in as the first fiber piece. So I'm happy to be able to share that with you. There were a wide range of exhibitions that focus on textiles of this period, what I'm talking about, the 50s and the early 60s. And they toggle between things that we might think of as fine art versus something made for a commercial market. So this is another example, finished rug designs, probably not a large commercial market. These were still very much handmade. And so this is this type of exhibition you could also find at the museum at this time. This is a good example of another piece that came into the collection early on by Mildred Fisher. It's a woven wall hanging. So this is a category that was prominent in the 50s. These are made on the loom, of course, and we have a number of examples of this type of work entering the collection. Then the first example we have outside of either rugs or woven wall hangings is embroidery work by Mariska Karas. I'm showing you examples here. This was in a show with another person, Catherine Choi, who was a ceramicist. Mariska Karas was a Hungarian immigrant to the US. She was part of sort of a Greenwich Village artistic scene that included what I want to say, like a revival of like American or fashion that included sort of accents from folk costume. So there was like a type of dress that she was promoting as like an original American look that had a lot to do with immigration and folk traditions that were being revived by immigrants at that time period. This would have been the 30s and 40s. And then she also was an expert needle worker. And so let me show you some examples. This is a good example of work from 57, Danubian in embroidery. And this is the second textile work that came into the collection in this same year. We have a large collection of Mariska Carraz's embroideries. They're incredibly beautiful. They range from pictorial examples to abstract examples. And most of those came in later in the 1990s through her daughters. And I'll show you some other examples of those. But that relationship was, I'm just pointing out, was established much earlier with the museum. Oh, I have them here. I didn't realize that I put them together. So these are the examples I mentioned coming in from the 1990s. We probably have 10 works at least that were given by Mariska Carraz's daughters, and they're really quite interesting. And I'm hoping to show these in a upcoming rotation of the permanent collection soon. I just put this in. These are slides. They're really not anything particularly interesting to look at, but I did want to point out that Fabrics International, which again has a commercial relationship to industry, was another type of exhibition that you could find at MAD in the early 1960s. And we had a number of prominent textile designers who either showed at the museum or were trustees of the museum and big supporters. The two that immediately come to mind is, of course, Dorothy Liebes, and I'll show you some of that work, and then Jack Lenore Larson. And they both gave major collections of works to the museum throughout the years. Another interesting figure is Alice Kagawa Parrott. So she showed in the early 60s, and we do have these beautiful examples of her work. This is just one of them that came in very early in 1963. So this is probably one of the fourth or fifth examples of fiber that was coming into the museum. Kagawa Parrott she grew up in Hawaii, ended up in New Mexico, where she spent a large amount of time documenting Navajo weaving and natural dyes of the area. But she herself had this very vibrant, almost Mary Mecco pop modernist color palette and style to her work. Now, the big breakthrough for MAD in terms of putting itself on the map as a place that supported the most radical direction that was happening in fiber and weaving is this exhibition, Woven Forms, from 1963. It included 5 artists. I'm showing you the cover on the left. I love these early exhibition catalogs for MAD. They're very tiny, like the one craftsmanship from a changing world is probably 5 by 5 inches. This one is about 6 by 6. They are all designed by his name escapes me now, but he was a well-known illustrator of the day. And so he would hand draw these wonderful covers and then include very inventive interleaves within the exhibition catalog. So in this case, the piece on the right opens up into like a poster. And this is a work by Dorian Zaki called Dog. Let's see here. So Dorian Zaki was included. You see on the left, Sheila Hicks. On the right, Lenore Tawney. Again, this example of Tawney's work shows just how far she's come from the piece that she gave in 1957 to these shaped weavings. Sheila Hicks was moving between small woven works on a hand loom and then all kinds of uses of fringe and braiding and twining. This is Claire Zeisler on the left with an example of the type of work she was doing by 63, even though she's shown in this photograph working at the loom. She would very shortly leave that behind. And then on the right, Alice Adams, again, a very inventive weaver. So making these shaped weavings here on the right-hand side next to her photograph. These I was able to find in our archive of slides that gives you a couple of installation shots. So on the right, a large amount of this exhibition was given over to Lenore Tawney. If I understand the notes correctly, this was probably first established or conceived as a solo exhibition for Tawney. So you see all of her works here. Really beautiful 3-dimensional hanging sculptures. And then on the left-hand side, what you're looking at on the back wall is a piece by Dorian Zaki, and I have that in color. I'll show you. And then it's hard to really figure out what else is going on here, but I think this one in the foreground on the left-hand side is possibly Alice Adams, another shaped, very unusual shaped weaving. So this is other works by SAQA that have recently come into the collection. So this was an interesting story. I knew of this work on the back wall, and I had always wondered about it. And the name just stuck in my head. And one day, a niece of Dorian SAQA just called me on the phone and said, listen, I got like 10 additional works. And I said, I know exactly who she is. And these works belong at MAD. We especially would be interested in anything that had been shown in an exhibition together. So we ended up with a group of works. They haven't all been photographed yet, even though they came in 2017. It takes us a while. This is Performing Woman. So not only did she do these unusual shaped weaving, she also did a great number of sort of stuffed figures, which are really fantastic. So this is like a dancing woman with one leg, standing on one leg and another leg like kicking out to the back with this wonderful cape that she's wearing. On the right-hand side is that piece that was on the back wall. It's called Emancipated Woman, which is also fascinating. This is 1963. So she's already involved in early feminist activism and making works that for her symbolize that. And then on the left-hand side, Three Wise Men, another three-dimensional sculpture with some a stuffed hand here. It's hard to read. I think other parts of it are also slightly stuffed. And then the rest, you can see it's woven. Just moving forward, this is works by Glenn Kaufman. Now, Glenn is a good example of someone who was working across fields, right? Like textiles for the commercial market, but also one-off unique works. And interestingly, his descendant has recently contacted me, and there are many of these works that they'd like to place. And I'm very interested in the one on the right because I can tell that that was in this exhibition. So for our acquisition strategy plan right now, I am very interested in finding works that were once shown at MAD. And if they had had the opportunity at the time, you know, could have acquired those works. So I'm kind of like retroactively making up for some of those oversights. So we'll see if we can bring that into the collection. Embroidery is an interesting category. I thought that I would be able to put together just a whole section on embroidery, which I probably could do if I had had the time, but it is something that both appears as special, you know, exhibitions, but it also just appears across a lot of different types of works in the collection. So I'm just going to show this one example of an exhibition that was in '67 called Stitching. And then on the right-hand side, this is just one example by Helen Bitar. This is a work that actually did eventually come into the collection, not through at this point, but a little bit later. I'll try to point out at times when there's embroidery included in work, so you can see how it permeates so many of the objects we have in the collection. Again, a couple of terrible archival slides, but it serves a good purpose here. Ed Rosbach, the artist Ed Rosbach, and Catherine Westphal, who were partners in life and work. There's a great number of objects from both of those artists that were gifted to the collection, primarily through them. And they start exhibiting at MAD very early on. So this is 1968, where there's a show where both of them showed together. And I'm showing one example of Rosbach on the left, and then on the right, I'm pretty sure this is still Rosbach, but I selected it because they both worked extensively in basket form too. And MAD has a huge collection of very, very unusual and interesting baskets. Rosbach and Westphal, I think, made some of the most interesting. And I just simply did not have time to put all of those in, because not only is it artists that we associate with the fiber art movement making baskets, we also have a very interesting collection of Japanese baskets that tend to be quite experimental. And then we have a large selection of baskets from artists who are continuing traditional, or let's say regional styles, or ways of making that are also very interesting. Basketry is a fascinating topic. I've been working on it for several years now because I'm thinking about a large scale exhibition that focuses on Mad's collection. How to bring all of those different strains together has been a challenge, and I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do that yet. Here's an example of Ed Rosbach's basketry, very eccentric. It's a lot of experimentation. It's a lot about looking at historical examples, fragments, and teaching oneself through those fragments. This didn't come in until 2000, but the Rosbach's work would filter in throughout the 70s, even to the present day. It's not unusual for me to receive inquiries from people who have Rosbach baskets almost on a monthly basis. This is another good example of a gift from the artist in the 90s, Young Hercules, a great piece that shows Rosbach, like how he's interested in working from the fragment. So this would be a tiny fragment of what looks to me like a Coptic textile that he's blown up, 50 times its size and remade. There's a number of dyed works. This is a tie-dye woven piece. We don't have, I don't think we have any of his commercial work that he made. But I'm still looking for some good examples of that. Another basket. They really range in style. And then Catherine, she gave, this one comes in through 1977, and it's a particular exhibition that I'll talk about in some detail in a second. She gave us a number of works that she thinks of as sort of quilts or alternative. They tend to combine a range of materials, or techniques, let's say. So dyed works, printed works. This one has a number of three-dimensional elements that come off the canvas there. It has been quilted from what I can see. I've seen this once or twice. There's also embroidery in certain areas. Really wonderful pieces. Macrame, we do have examples of artists showing using that term in the 60s. And you can imagine that's part of a larger kind of countercultural exploration of different techniques. So in 1970, Dorothy Liebes, one of the commercial artists, weavers who had a commercial business that I mentioned earlier, along with Jack Lenore Larson, had a large retrospective exhibition. Through that, you see her there on the right. She was a remarkable artist, business person, you name it. There was just a wonderful another retrospective of her work at the Cooper Hewitt, and the exhibition catalog is fantastic. I highly recommend it. And it was wonderful to see because a lot of Mad's works were part of this. After this exhibition, she gave quite a number of samples and then larger scale works. So she was well known for using all of these metallics, which you can see on the right here. And then on the left, I've just shown you a few of what I think of as these samples that came into the collection. And they look like this on the left. They're often already mounted, and they're just wonderful to put all together so you can get a range of her work all in one case. So this is what they looked like at the Cooper Hewitt. And then on the right-hand side, a wonderful one-off piece that includes this pattern of scissors and a tape measure at the top. Another large solo exhibition by a fiber artist, Olga de Amaral from Colombia, took place in 1971. And we were able to acquire a number of works from that collection or that exhibition as well. These are some of the most sought after for exhibitions, exhibition loans at the moment. We've got both of ours over at the Metropolitan Museum right now. They have an exhibition that focuses on artists working with and away from the loom, but influenced by pre-Columbian sources. So people like Olga de Amaral, Sheila Hicks, Francois Grossin, etc. This is another example in our collection. This one says gift of the Dreyfus Corporation. So that's also quite interesting. There is a large number of works, large scale fiber works from the I want to say 70s and 80s that were collected by the Dreyfus Corporation and installed in their headquarters here in New York City. They then eventually came as a group into our holdings at the museum. Here's another really wonderful piece by Olga de Amaral that came in through the Dreyfus Corporation as a gift. So now we're in the early 70s. This is sculpture and fiber. It included 12 artists. You see the list on the right-hand side, and it was very much conceived as an update, or maybe not an update, but just a report from the field. Almost more than, how many decades is that? From 1963, I don't know, like 15, 25. I can't do the math when I'm trying to talk at the same time, but it is presented as, what are these fiber artists doing now? And how is MAD going to capture the attention and make this part of the field that they stand for and support? So these are two archival images that show that exhibitions, the only two I could find, unfortunately. On the left, these curled pieces, those are definitely by Claire Zeisler. And then against the wall on that same slide, I'm pretty sure is also a Claire Zeisler piece. And then on the right, I'm almost positive those are works by another artist, Walter Nottingham, that were in the collection. I could be wrong about that. I'd have to do a little bit more research. One of the artists who was prominently featured in this exhibition was Francois Grossin. And we have a number of works by her that came into the collection. Oh, I also put these in by Fern Jacob. She was also part of this show. And just as a way to continue on this theme of baskets to the best I could, Fern Jacob is known for these very unusual basket shapes. And these are two that ended up in our collection. And then here's the works by Francois Grossin that eventually became part of the collection, but her first appearance at MAD was in this sculpture and fiber show in 72. So there'd be this beautiful hanging piece, this piece in sisal, which includes a lot of knotting and macrame. We probably have, I'm pretty sure, 3 to 4, at least 4, maybe 5 large scale works like this one. Fabric vibrations, tie-dye and fold dye, wall hangings and environments. This is from 72. So again, we're looking at sort of the revival of interest in ethnic textiles and tie-dye associated with the American counterculture and the revival of craft in the US at this time. It included garments, as you can see on the right. The piece on the left, I think I have a better detail of that. I'll get to it in a second. On the left-hand side, this is another garment by the fashion designer Halston. And then on the right, a hanging by Chung-Hee Chu. We have a number of tie-dyed works by Chung-Hee in the collection. She's, of course, better known, I think, as a silversmith. And then a beautiful piece by Marion Clayton, who is featured prominently in this exhibition, also came into the collection around this time. So this is a large scale multi-piece dyed work that was in her mind used for any kind of ceremonial moment or event. And so this is its most recent installation in the museum. I want to say almost 4 or 5 years ago, I think. Now, the major turning point for the way the collection was built or developed is this exhibition, Objects USA, which was at MAD in 1972. It began much earlier and toured throughout the US and internationally in the late 60s and early 70s. It was co-curated by a dealer named Lee Nordness and MAD's chief curator at the time, Paul Smith. It included over 500 objects by 258 artists, and it was sponsored by S.C. Johnson and Son, the company. S.C. Johnson was a collector of a large number of different kinds of artworks, and he became interested in craft through the dealer Lee Nordness. It opened in 1969 at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and then, as I said, traveled to MAD where it finished its run. And because Paul was involved with the co-curation, he was S.C. Johnson decided to gift these works after the show ended its tour, and Paul had was given first dibs over a large number of the objects, and probably close to 240 objects in this exhibition came into MAD, and it really to this day forms the core of our historic collection. And these are works that are continually sought after by other other curators, and they're out on loan quite often. And we've begun showing them in our permanent collection installations more often too, because it's really, if anybody knows anything about MAD's history, they know this exhibition and they know the objects that came in, which are really, really fascinating and cut across all mediums. So what you're seeing here is the exhibition catalog on the left, and then one of the historic photos, you see a piece, a fiber piece hanging in the front, you see a rug, you see another piece in the back. I think I have some of these in color, so I can show them to you. I can point out others. On the right, there's a piece by Kei Sekamachi. The rug in the center is by Toshiko Takaezu. And on the left, I can identify the kind of shaggy piece by Claire Zeisler. And I'm pretty sure the piece above in the center towards the back in that image is Walter Nottingham. Let's see. So those are the Helen Vitar pillows that you see on the left-hand side on the floor that showed up earlier in the stitching exhibition. That's Alma Thomas's embroidery on the wall. I have a better shot of that. And then on the image on the right, you see the Claire Zeisler again, and against the wall, you see two works by Trudy Guermont-Pré. Here's that Alma Thomas piece. This is tremendously large, larger than a king size bedspread. That's the only way I can describe it. And as a result, it doesn't come out of MAD's collection very often because it's difficult to hang. But we are working on that. Like, what is the best way to present this piece? Because it's tremendous work in embroidery. And then here's just a sampling of some of the works. One of which we've already seen, which is Catherine Westfall's piece T8 Below. So that came into the collection through this exhibition. Next to that on the left is Kei Sekamachi. That's a multi-harness woven piece out of black monofilament. And then it's taken off the harness and you can turn, expand it into this beautiful three-dimensional piece. On the left to that is Marilyn Pappas's opera coat. So that is a found object, an actual silk opera coat. And then it opens up into this cascade of gorgeous, gorgeous embroidery that comes out. And so it is life size. That is a magnificent piece. And then on the right, casement fabric, hand spun, hand woven by Alan and Dorothy Fannin. And they were a couple that ran their own workshop in Brooklyn and then upstate New York for these custom textiles. So again, the exhibition, when it could, also included things that were made, let's say like yardage, so something that was commercially available. For the most part, though, the exhibition was really designed to support artists who were turning their practice in these mediums towards a contemporary art world that would look at these as art objects, right? So these are artists, they're still really battling very prejudicial divisions between art and craft in the art world at this time. And they're looking to, the curators looking to make a mark for these artists. And, prove their equality and worth, and of course, generate exhibition press, which was tremendous because this toured to like 30 venues. It was all extremely positive because it was perceived as like a fun exhibition, an interesting exhibition, an exhibition where there was a lot of wow moments, like how did somebody do that, or what that, things that are so beautiful that could be incorporated into people's homes in ways that people could imagine. Now, the next section that I wanted to tackle, because I know less about it, although I know you all are already experts, is quilts. The Museum of Arts and Design has shown or organized or accepted as tours numerous quilt shows. And so I identified several. There was the New American Quilt in 1976. That seems to be the first one. The quilt New Directions for an American Tradition, 1983. There was an exhibition called Homage to the Quilt in 1988. In 1989, Improvisation in African American Quilting. So that's the first one to focus specifically on African American quilting. On the Cutting Edge, Contemporary Quilts from the Permanent Collection, 1997. So that means by 97, there had been collected enough examples in this category to do a permanent collection show. And then Spirits of the Cloth, Contemporary Quilts by African American Artists, 1999. And then Six Continents of Quilts, the American Craft Museum Collection from 2002. I also found one solo exhibition, it traveled to MAD, of the work of Nancy Crow. So in my research, that is what I focused on these exhibitions. And what I'm showing you here is one historical shot from the exhibition On the Cutting Edge, Contemporary Quilts from the Permanent Collection, that's 97. And then on the left, the cover from the book that accompanied Spirits of the Cloth, Contemporary Quilts by African American Artists from 1999. Now you see Carolyn Mazlumi's name on that. She was the organizer of both the exhibition and the book, and she worked with our chief curator at the time, David McFadden, also as an organizer, and they were both involved in touring the exhibition. The African American quilts that were included in Spirits of Cloth that belonged to MAD were already shown though in 1997. And you see a couple of them here on this historic shot on the right. So let me go forward. There were, let me make sure I get this right. 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 4 quilts by Black artists that were given as a gift from the Horace Goldsmith Foundation between 93 and 95. So by 97, they could be included in that Cutting Edge show. So I'm showing you Michael Cummins, I'll Fly Away from 1991. This is Peggy Hartwell on the right, African Skies and Southern Soil, 1994. These are both obviously narrative and pictorial quilts. Both have a lot to do with either, in case of Hartwell, her own personal biography, that is her family. And then on the left for Michael Cummins, again, drawing from African American history as well as African pattern and applique techniques. And then another 2 here that came in through this gift from the Goldsmith Foundation, Faith Ringgold. This is, why can't I remember it? It's about Alice in Wonderland. Visions of Alice, I think it is. The date is 1988/93. So she went back and worked on it for a number of years. And then on the right, Carolyn Mazlumi, The Family Solid, 91 to 93. Of course, Carolyn is an important figure in the field of Black quilt making because she established the founder of Women of Color Quilters Network, which came into being in 1986. So by the time she produces the book, I'm looking at my notes here, let's see where it is, Spirits of the Cloth, 1999, she's been collecting work and meeting artists through this network for quite some time. I just wanted to show you that in our most recent rotation of our permanent collection, we have both Carolyn's piece on view, or had it on view, it just came down last week, You see it on the right, and then on the left, Shades of Alice, I think that's what it's called, Faith Ringle's story quilt. And then in the right, a piece that's not in our collection, but we would love to collect. I don't think we'll be able to acquire this piece, but we're looking for one by the younger Black quilt maker, Bisa Butler. The other reason I brought this particular image in, is because in the foreground, you see 3 quilts or samples, let's say, that were collected, I want to say I'm pretty sure in the 1990s, but are much older than anything else we have in the collection. There's probably only 1 or 2 other objects that are older than this. Everything in our collection really begins from 56 on. These were made in the 1930s as part of the WPA's Tennessee Valley Authority electrification project in the southern part of the United States. And it's Ruth Clement Bond who was behind the work with the wives of the Black laborers on that project. They were working as part of a home beautification organization, and they produced these samples for what would become larger quilts that had a lot to do with the work that their husbands were doing and their support for that project and pride in their ability to participate in this electrification project in the South. The person whose name I'm forgetting, Ruth Clement Bond worked with someone who was a quilt maker, who's also named on the label here in this exhibition. For the life of me, it's escaped my memory at the moment, but they're very, very beautiful. The one on the right, I particularly love. It is a Black Power fist that shows a sort of electric bolt coming through it. Okay, now let's see, I want to talk about On the Cutting Edge. There are 12 artists who were in that collection or in that exhibition. They included the 4 Black artists that I mentioned, and then we've got Nancy Crow on the left, Color Blocks 1, 1988. These are all works that came into the collection. Michael James, Waves 2, also from 88. Tom Lumberg on the left, Lucky Yellow. It combines quilting with embroidery. Linda McDonald, Peter's Favorite from 91. Ellen Oppenheimer, Patriots Maze from 91. This is the Westfall piece, which you've seen several times. Looks like it's upside down there. That's my fault. And it was shown again in Cutting Edge. And then kind of an outlier, this work by Ann Wilson, who really was a painter and then moved into the world of theater. She made this in 59, and it is a found quilt, which has then been sort of further distressed and painted. And that was given as a gift from a friend of the artist. The last quilt show I want to talk about is 6 Continents of Quilts. So it included part of the American Craft Museum collection, and then work was solicited from around the world to be part of this show. And then it toured in the US and internationally. This is the image that was on the cover by Jane Sassman, an American. I'm just going to give you a feel for the different types of quilts that were part of that show, many of which came into the collection. Kira Hicks, Patriotic Quilt. This is Ludmila Uspenshaga from Russia. This would include quilting and embroidery. Almost all of these examples that I pulled include quite a bit of embroidery. This is Ludmila Aristova. I'm pretty sure she's also Russian. Yes. Miwako Kimura from Japan, a beautiful piece with a lot of embroidery. Natasha Murdadova, again, tremendous amount of embroidery included in this piece as well. Judith Content in the US. Sanai Hattori, another Japanese artist. We just recently showed this piece as part of our permanent collection. It's a gorgeous assemblage of hand appliqued, embroidered, pieced and quilted segments, gorgeous. Priscilla Bianchi, it combines Guatemalan hand-woven cloth and American cotton cloth. Patricia Malisher, from 1991, Mylar. We've looked at this just recently. It's fascinating piece. It includes Xerox transfers. It's painted, machine quilted, and then parts of hand sewn. And then Grace Alameda, Brazil, for 500 years. So this is an artist who sent in something from Brazil. So now we're really getting towards newer acquisitions. And
Elissa,
go ahead.
if you can just sort of flip through these slides, unfortunately,
Sure.
we're running out of time.
Okay, no problem.
But if you could
We
just
kind of like ended where we began with radical lace and subversive
Yes.
knitting. So I should
Yes,
probably just
indeed.
end with this, because lace is one thing that we haven't talked a lot about, but we do have some wonderful examples in the collection that came from this show from 2007. One here is Piper Shepherd. It's a terrible slide, but it's a sort of muslin with gesso, and then there are these this is all hand cut.
Mhm.
And this gorgeous piece by Yoshiki Hishinimuma, which is a knitted example.
Yeah.
Orly Kogan and Annette Kallenberg. And so I'll just end there. How's that?
That's wonderful. What I remember, besides the lace and the rusted shovel, was that there was a video showing two construction trucks who were knitting with telephone pole knitting needles.
I totally remember
knitting
that.
Yes, American
it's before
flag.
my time, because I wasn't at the museum, but I was certainly there. I did come directly. I wasn't even living in New York, but I came to New York to see this show because it was so fascinating to me.
It was amazing. We have time for just one question,
Sure.
and it came from a couple people, which is to ask you to talk a little bit about MAD's current acquisitions policy. What should one do if you have pieces in your collection that you think might be appropriate for the museum?
Well, I did mention that I'm very interested in backfilling our historic collection because that history is so spotty. And when I find something that's in or had been shown in an exhibition, that's very attractive to our collections committee. They do have the final say. I can bring something to them, but it's really up to them whether they want to collect it or not. And then the other thing we're looking at right now are artists who are really crossing the boundaries between what we might think of as medium specific world of textiles or fiber and the contemporary art world. So they're combining a lot of work. They might be more oriented towards the contemporary art world, but as MAD, we want to be able to expand our collection that takes into consideration this moment that we're in, where artists can move more comfortably between these worlds. So examples, well, I can tell you, I can sort of throw out names, but I'm not sure it would be helpful or not, but like Sarah Zapata, we've just collected a work by her. She's interested in baskets. We've collected, I'm trying to think. There are some recent embroidery works that have come in. David Harper comes to mind. I've got many other slides that I could show you, but really, we have not given much thought to quilts. That's something that comes up all the time. Like, what are we doing in this category? I don't really know. It's not something that the collections committee has focused on in the recent past. That could come up again. We're always looking for new ways to expand. I'm very interested in baskets, as I mentioned, because I'm trying to put that exhibition together. So that's an issue. You know, we're pretty open, but I do have to say it is up to that collections committee, and they can be very, very strict about what they want to take.
Well, thank you so much for
thank you.
sharing this look back at exhibitions and pieces from the collection. For me, it really was a trip down memory lane because I was born in 60, but by, early 70s was starting to borrow books from the library about contemporary craft. And so
Yeah.
it's just wonderful to
Yeah,
see
so you
these
lived that
pieces.
transition or that
Yeah,
history. That's
yeah,
very interesting.
yeah. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you will join us next week. We have another really great program on order, and I know you'll enjoy it as well. If you enjoy Textile Talks, please consider making a donation to help support the costs of this programming. We love to do it, but there are definite costs involved, and we need your help in meeting those expenses. Elissa, thank you again. This has
Oh,
been
sure.
phenomenal.
Sure. Thank you.
All
Bye.
right. Bye-bye.